Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Nancy Netzer, the Robert L. and Judith T. Winston Director of the McMullen Museum and Professor of Art History at Boston College. And I want to welcome all of you, members of the museum and special guests, to the preview day for Indian Ocean Current. It's an understatement to say that the McMullen is honored to present this major exhibition devoted to the installations of 6 outstanding artists displayed upstairs. Their dedication to creating work of aesthetic power relevant to the most urgent issues of our time makes this an occasion for meditation and dialogue on the interrelationship among the arts, climate justice, and ethical responses to our environmental crisis. Immersing viewers in the historical events related to the Indian Ocean, the artists upstairs highlight the complexity of a number of difficult issues facing our world today. Contemplation of their works is intended to spark meaningful discussions among visitors. In conjunction with a robust lineup of courses, lectures, and other public programs, the McMullen aims to engage our campus with the broader community throughout the run of the exhibition in conversations about the interrelationship of migration, borders, and climate change. The project that we're celebrating today in the Daly Family and Monin Galleries originated in 2016 when Prasannan Parthasarathi, a professor in Boston College's history department, spoke to me about his long-standing research and teaching interests in the history of the Indian Ocean. At the time, he was writing a book on environmental change in 19th century South India and had just returned from a research trip to Mauritius, where he had studied the records of migrants from South India to that island. While there, he had seen his old friend, the architect and artist Salim Currimjee, founder of the Institute of Contemporary Art, Indian Ocean. The Institute for Contemporary Art Indian Ocean is a platform for art education and public programming. Prasannan and Salim wondered if the McMullen Museum might consider an exhibition of works by contemporary artists from lands bordering the ocean, one that would speak to the movement of goods, ideas, and people across it and to the consequences of its current rising waters. Embracing the idea, the McMullen team met with Prasannan and Salim, only to realize that the project had even richer possibilities than originally envisioned for exploring relationships between art and climate change. The project team then widened to include experts in climate science. Professor of Earth and Environmental Sciences, Gail Kinnicky, led the team, and we're so pleased to have Gail with us here today. And we were able then to incorporate the groundbreaking research of scientists Suharta Murthy and Caroline Umenhofer from the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. Concurrently, Salim proposed artists whose work in various media probe and stimulate dialogue about concerns within the diverse communities that now populate the Indian Ocean world. The McMullen was delighted when 6 renowned artists with roots in different communities surrounding the ocean, Shiraz Baiju, Shilpa Gupta, Nicholas Lobo, Wangechi Mutu, Penny Siopis, and Hajra Waheed, agreed to participate in the exhibition. We thank them, their studios, and their gallerists for their generous participation, encouragement, and investment in the project. The curators then assembled a team of distinguished scholars from a range of disciplines who, like themselves, were eager to write essays for the catalog edited by Prasannan about the artist's work and the issues they engender. The museum is grateful to Sanya Iyer, Sunil Amrit, Salim Currimjee, Berenice Guyot-Richard, Pedro Machado, David Northra, and Kalpana Seshadri for their contributions. This exhibition epitomizes what a university museum of art can contribute to the understanding of a crisis in a distant part of the world when faculty and other experts from the humanities, sciences, and social sciences collaborate on a project. It could not have been undertaken without the historical knowledge, vision, dedication, and enthusiasm of Prasannan, and Salim's art historical expertise and extensive knowledge of contemporary artists throughout the world. To their symbiotic partnership, the museum extends its deepest thanks for leading this project. They worked closely with our experts at the McMullen Museum. Assistant Director Diana Larson designed the galleries innovatively, evoking the atmosphere of the ocean while accommodating each artist's installation as well as displays by climate scientists. Assistant Director John McCoy designed the catalog, adapted the digital didactics for the exhibition's scientific component to reflect a contemporary aesthetic. Manager of Publications and Exhibitions, Kate Schubert, expertly oversaw the editing of the catalog in addition to organizing all the loans with the artists and their gallerists. Rachel Chamberlain, Manager of Education, Outreach, and Digital Resources, has created a series of programs, including this one, and events to engage audiences with the artist's works and reflect on current concerns in the Indian Ocean world. The museum docents, chaired by Sharon Bazarian, deserve our gratitude for mastering not only the messages of the artist's works, but also the geology of the Indian Ocean world. The spirit of collaboration carried over into other areas of our university as well. Professor of Art Mark Cooper and Professor of Computer Science Louis Sang provided invaluable advice. The Institute for Liberal Arts and the Lowell Lecture Series, along with Asian Studies, History, and the English Department, have supported related programs. And there are many others who made important contributions to the exhibition, and I encourage you to read the credits label in the gallery. As always, the McMullen Museum could never have realized a project involving transport of works from around the world without the ongoing support of the administration of Boston College and the McMullen Family Foundation. We especially thank Jacqueline McMullen, President Leahy, Provost Quigley, and Dean Kalsher. Major support for the exhibition was provided by the patrons of the McMullen Museum, chaired by Mike Daly, and by Lillian and Christian Haub in honor of their 3 children who are recent graduates of Boston College, Marie Lillian, Maximilian, and Constantine Haub. So on behalf of the McMullen Museum, I want to thank everyone who was involved in bringing this enterprise to a successful completion. And at this point, I want to invite our 2 curators, Prasannan and Salim, to introduce you to Indian Ocean Current and to what has been occupying their minds for the past 3 years in shaping this exhibition. Please join me in congratulating them.
Thank you, Nancy, for that very generous introduction. And thank you to all of you for coming out today on such a spectacularly beautiful January afternoon. Before Salim and I dive into our lecture on the exhibit, we want to add our round of thanks to all the individuals who have made this exhibition possible. I don't want to repeat all the names that Nancy just read out, but Salim and I are very grateful to all of them as well. But I do want to thank the staff of the McMullen Museum, Kate Shugart, Rachel Chamberlain, John McCoy, Diana Larson, and Nancy Netzer have been an incredible source of support, guidance, and lots of nuts and bolts work on the ground for the last 3 years, and without them, this exhibition would not have been possible. So please, let's give them a round of thanks for valuable work that they did. Well, here's the Indian Ocean. And as Nancy said, in 2016, I visited Mauritius, and there I visited an institute that Salim has started, the Institute for Contemporary Art Indian Ocean, which he will tell us more about in a few minutes, and was just amazed by the extraordinary work that he was doing, bringing in artists, conducting educational work in Mauritius, and was struck as a historian. And as a historian, I've been teaching and writing about the Indian Ocean for a couple of decades. I was just really struck by the different perspective that he brought to the ocean and the people who live on its shores, that from the perspective of contemporary artists, how different that was from the perspective that I had as a historian. So I thought we should just really team up, and I said, and we need to make your work available to a broader audience, Salim. So I said, let's do a show at the McMullen. And Salim was immediately agreed. And I came back, and I should add, Salim and I first met in September 1981. So this is an old friendship, and it's been really exciting to work with him on this. And I came back, and I met with Nancy, and I proposed this project, and she was enthusiastic about it. So that's how the project started. And let me turn it over to Salim. Salim is going to speak for about 20 minutes. Then I will speak for about 4 hours. I was 2 years ahead of him as an undergraduate, so I feel like I still have seniority. No, so then I'll speak for about 20 minutes, and then we'll take some questions. But give you plenty of time to explore the galleries, because that's really what we'd like you to do. Salim.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming. Of course, thank you, like Prasannan said, to all the museum, everyone involved in the show. Yes, the list is long, and I really, really appreciate. Thank you to Prasannan for planting the seed of this exhibition. And so we finally, 3 years later, we are here and something to show to you. Prasannan, I sent him a lot of slides, and he said, "Oh, how long are you going to talk for?" I said, "I don't like talking very much, so I'll show more slides," and he can do more of the talking. But yes, Prasannan visited in 2016, and when he gave the idea of the show, I thought I was very, very excited, because I'd started a foundation 5 years ago in Mauritius called ICAIO, the Institute of Contemporary Art Indian Ocean. And I'll just read a little bit. It's an independent, not-for-profit foundation for art education. Since its launch, we have worked to democratize access to art by offering free exhibitions and lectures and sponsoring visits of international art professionals in the region. Our goal is to weave a new understanding and connectivity among the various countries in the Indian Ocean Rim. ICAIO honors the cultural diversity and seeks to activate critical thinking and dialogue through arts of the region. One of the main reasons I'd started the foundation was because there is no art museum in Mauritius. And I felt that young children growing up really need to have an access to art museum and see art in real instead of just seeing images. And then when I realized when we set up the foundation that a lot of the children were seeing art, either painting or sculpture, for the first time in their lives. And that's what really motivated me to continue, because it's sort of a two-part to the foundation. One is the link with the young children from 8 to 12. And the other link is Mauritius being in the Indian Ocean and looking at the zone. Mauritius was always... Oops. This is the old map of the Indian Ocean and where we started sort of base. And this is sort of a drawing I've done saying how important the region has become. And the region meaning there's everyone. Before we always looked at the world with America, Europe, sort of the big, the big people, and we were always in the south. But now there's this huge universe between Africa, Southeast Asia, Australia, China, and Indian Ocean has become like a really strong own center. And from there, I saw a lot of possibilities from artists from all over the world coming, and there's such a richness of diversity, culture present here, that they would be inspired, and then we start making new connections throughout in a new way. This is the first map of Mauritius from the 1740s, done by the Dutch. Obviously, Mauritius was visited by a lot of people, and so we do have Mauritius itself. The name is a Dutch name, and so we have a lot of different cultures all mixing. And one of these things, I say, when you start making maps and you say it becomes very logical in how you look at it. And so I've used this quote from Einstein saying, logic will take you from A and B. And he says, imagination will take you everywhere. This is where the foundation in Port Louis, the capital of Mauritius, where I set up. We've got 80 meters square. We really wanted to have the place in a sort of, it looks like a shop. So you don't feel very threatened entering it. It's free. It's open to the public. And we've got 80 meters square space to show. We have 4 shows a year. And we work with school children. So we do workshops while the shows are on. We do about 4 shows a year. And the shows last for 3 months. This is a drawing I've done, historically, Mauritius was known as the star and key of the Indian Ocean. And today, I say that maybe Mauritius can become the cultural weaver of the Indian Ocean. So I've done this map where the vertical, the wharf, is represented by different elements. For example, you would have museums, galleries, artists, critics, curators, schools, universities, publications. These are all the elements that you need to create art in a society and to sustain art and how it evolves. And then the horizontal, the weft, is using the connections and weaving between countries, between the Indian Ocean region. And of course, obviously that was the first goal, is to go through working a lot with Reunion, with Madagascar, South Africa, India, Southeast Asia. And incredibly, it's great that we now have this connection with Boston. These are a few slides showing the exhibitions that we've had in the past 4 years. So we have exhibitions of single artists, and we also have exhibitions, group exhibitions curated by curators from South Africa, India, from France, who've done group shows. This is the first room, and so it's an old building. And again, this sort of the same ideas that the old and the new, they coexist, and we make new meanings and new connections come up. This is a show by Zanele Moholi, where we're showing right now. This was a sculpture show in the second space. So we've got 2 spaces that link up. Like I said, workshops with the children from 8 to 12 make a big part of the work we do at ICAIO. So we've now hooked up. It's very, very difficult. On one level, it's very hard because the government doesn't have a curriculum for art in the public schools, in primary schools. And so it's very hard to convince them to send their children to come see a show at a gallery. On the other hand, the government has set a second level of schools, private schools, which they call Zone Éducation Prioritaire. These are underprivileged children who failed their exams, and so they get put in a special school. And the government allows me to take those students and bring them to the shows, because they say the other students have to work and they can't leave. But these students, even though they failed, they can leave and come. So there's a huge contradiction. But so I work with 14 schools, and we do two workshops a week. For about between 14 and 18, I do one workshop, and the co-director of the foundation does another workshop. So with the artists who we're showing, we come up with the plan of a workshop, and then we visit the exhibition, and then we go through and do some sort of art, painting or sculpture, or writing little poems, or doing collages and different things. This is a little kid who is doing a sculpture, and it's incredible that he uses the 2 spoons for the arms, and the metaphor of eating and with your arms and with the spoon and stuff. I think it's just incredible. This was a show we had of a photography artist, Samuel Fosso, and what was really incredible, because Samuel Fosso disguises himself in different roles, and one of these photos show African presidents, and there was the photo of Ethiopian Emperor Haile Selassie. And so the little kids go around and they got to choose who they want to be when they're old, or why do they like these photos. And the little kid said, I want to be like Haile Selassie, I want to be emperor, I'm going to be president of Mauritius. So I thought, oh, this is really a great thing. This kid of 9 years old saying he's got very high goals. And I asked the other kids, who else wants to be president? So 3 little girls put their hands up. And the boy turns around and said, women cannot be president. So you really see, it's incredible how much you learn by looking at what the kids feel and how society, the pulse of society comes through, because there's this real, the kids see the truth, what's happening. This is another exhibition we had of Zanele Mohole that I mentioned, and this little girl from very, very poor neighborhood, she saw this photograph and she held my hand and said, I know, I like this photo. And I said, why? She said, because this woman I know, she's a maid. She can only be a maid in Creole. So looking from her background, black women are only maids. The only role models she has are people who are maids. So she was very excited because she said, I know what this person does. But then you realize how in Mauritius there's so much to teach the children and so much there's to learn. This is them again when they finish their class, and we take group photos so they can use it for doing things. Then the second part of my talk is a little bit is how we chose the artists. I've been traveling a lot in the region, South Africa, India, in the Indian Ocean, Europe, and getting to know a lot of the artists, a lot of the art that's been produced. And I think a lot of artists, when I'm now writing and looking back, and again, till you don't actually write things, you don't see how it all comes together. And when you look at it, you say, whose practice engages within the region in a pluralistic and multiple ways. There is an ethos of exchanging and sharing of ideas that enable an articulation of new and reimagined epistemologies. Historically, if you look at it, a certain inertia of art historians grouping objects from the same geographical area ended up producing an art of the place. And you said this was what the art was. It was based on a single narrative, and has been challenged within this post-colonial archive where arrays of contribution have activated plural socio-political, economic, and cultural engagements. Post-colonial narratives have redefined these initial limitations, which were highlighted to give back and given a new context and provide a platform of a huge amount of various voices, contexts, and knowledge systems. So the aesthetics is different, and where there's no longer this geographical stratification that once existed. Looking at the different artists, the first artist, I'm going through it alphabetically, was Shiraz Beju, who lives and works in London. This is one of the works which is in the show. And if you look at it, he explores notions of nationhood and the exploration of identities through the use of photographs, artifacts stored in public and private archives. He does work in film, photography, painting, in different medias, and they all sort of come together in a space, and so you see the whole, you get the whole feeling. In the collages and the paintings, symbols such as maps, flags, cultural motifs show up. In this case, in this one, he's using the reefs, habitats that Darwin did in the colonial in 1842. He did a set of illustrations based on Mauritius from the corals. So also based with this, there's this sort of the real using the old photographs, the maps, and then it sort of becomes an abstract layering where he layers images. The ocean provides a sort of this vivid luminosity and acts as an important visual marker of place, of territory, and of belonging. The layering also gives the effect of, like, talks about migration and colonization. And you start getting these abstract translucent patterns. So the image is like broken down, re-looked, re-explored, offering the viewer a new composition that are culturally and politically emotive and removed from the original context. These are some other images which are in the show not. So there's the sea shanty video. Again, the video is projected, like I'm showing where it was projected in Mauritius, where he projected it onto the walls of an old stone building. So it's the same video, and then depending how it's projected, and here we've projected it on burlap, and here in one case in Mauritius is on the old stone building, so that gives another connotation of visiting the historical. Ile-de-France, a movie he did on Mauritius, which is a non-narrative film with images of nature and colonial architecture. This again represents encounters between the island and the colonial past. So the images of the cemetery, the sea, the gods at the Hindu temple, and different things. And if you see, even in some of the old, in the newer works, the paintings where he uses old frames and just using that as a layering of history with the new. Okay. Shilpa Gupta is the next artist in the show, and we have got three really beautiful works of hers. One which is There Is No Border, which is self-adhesive tape, and with this tape, this was done in 2005, she also does these flags. So it's incredible that you have the tape which says this is no border, and then at the same time you're making a flag. And flags define the countries and define where sort of things. So there's always this sort of really, really tension within the work, and it's really beautiful because she just does it with such little, with very minimal language and very, very subtle. And as a person, she really is that kind of artist. When you meet her and stuff, she's very, very soft-spoken and very bright and takes her time and talks, and it's just incredible. And what she says, I'm interested in perception, therefore, with how definitions get stretched or trespassed, be it gender, beliefs, or the notion of a state. Her mediums, they range from, she manipulates found objects, video, performance, computer-based installation, and like the basic basis of her work is human perception and how information gets transmitted and internalized in daily life. So for her, it's defined by the place, by the people, by your experiences. And that is why one of the works we've chosen here is the act of participating, where you actually, which is incredible because when you start this, I'm saying it, maybe you haven't done it, but when you start this, you feel that you're looking, how would I say, you're participating, you're the observer. And then when it starts speaking to you, you become the performer. So you change from observing to performing, which is quite a startling stance because you're standing on these bricks and you suddenly feel a little bit thrown back and get this thing. So the act of participating, interactive, and the public dimension is really, really important to her work. Looking at the public sphere, especially in India, where she based most of her work, but she's an international artist, but it speaks of gender, class barriers, religious differences, and the continuous power of repressive state, and how society is becoming, very sort of bland and uniform. So she's always questioning this and making you look at all these different issues. These are some of the other works. The work on the top left right is For In Your Tongue I Cannot Fit. This is was shown at the Venice Biennale last year in 2019. And it's basically, she took poems from 100 poets throughout the world who had been either put in prison or silenced. And then she read the poems, and so you could read the poems because they're on the white paper, and at the same time the microphones were reading out the poems to you. And so if you were close enough, you would hear one poem, but the whole thing made like one noise. And so that was a completely different feeling. The small work on the left-right there's a tiny, tiny poem that she wrote, and it's called A Car Stopped, a few men stepped out and pushed into my mouth a liquid. The mouth froze. And that's when she did the sculpture. And then it's called I Was Walking on the Street. And the last one is a public sculpture that was done in the beach in Bombay. And she says, I live under your sky too. And there was neon lights, and then it kept going on and off at different rates at different times. Oh, sorry. This is the work of Nicholas Lobo, South African artist, who basically explores he's a South African, but from the Xhosa tribe, and all his titles of his work are in Xhosa. Although he remembers it from his grandmother, from his mother. He speaks it a little bit, but he doesn't write. And now slowly he's learned to understand it more. His works talks about sexuality, identity, masculinity, and ethnicity. Nicholas, again, was from quite early on. He calls this a drawing because it's on paper. But for him, he never uses a pencil. And he says, doesn't matter. For him, he found his own language. And his language, drawing, is working on paper, but he basically uses ribbon or thread. And so he says, I use that, and that's my language that I've developed, and these are my drawings. And he loves animals, he loves dogs, so they're always sort of an animal form. There's always, and then he uses different materials, which are both feminine and masculine. So for masculine, he uses very sort of gay-related rubber inner tubes, leather. And for the feminine, he would use ribbon, organza, lace. And he mixes all of these to create different works, talking about sexuality and identity. it is very much work which is anchored in South Africa, but it also belongs to South Africa, but relates to the rest of the world. He really believes in the power of the mind and of his fingers. So he says, this is why I'm doing like sewing, like my grandmother, like my mother used to sew. And it's like a child. He says, we no longer children, but as a child, it is put, it look round and you look and you really see what is happening. So this is what he's trying to do. This work is called Pula Pulani, meaning listen, pay attention to the detail. And if you look at it, you can't see in this drawing, but it also incorporates, he uses the headphones of an iPhone, which are stitched into the drawing. So that gives the meaning to the work. It's like you're listening to the music. This is just a shot of the head of the dragon to see how he stitches and works with the needle. In his paintings, which he also uses the same language, he uses canvas, but he never uses paint. He uses rubber, cloth, and is basically, he uses saying painting is like the notion of stitching one's identity. So he basically cuts the canvas, and for him these cuts become lines, become like veins, and it becomes like a skin. So the canvas like becomes a skin, and then when he is re-sewing it, he says there's this sort of life underneath the soul of the painting, and he's re-stitching and keeping the soul within it. But the soul has its own life, so it makes bumps, and it's got threads, and it's got lines, and it's got curves, and so it's like re-recounting your own life through that. His big sculptures are very often look like a little bit like animals, amoebic shaped. They've got tails, they've got threads coming through. This is like a whale. It's sort of half submerged, so it's either you could imagine it being submerged or coming out from the sea. So you get this dual always thing, the idea, the notion of the tide that was cover it or come around. And for him, it's like a metaphor for surrender, because he says that something like the tide, elements that which we have no control. And often in our life, there are a lot of things that happen to us where we have no control, and we shouldn't worry about it, and we should just let these things go, because they're things that happen without our control. Okay, time. Okay, I have to go faster. Okay, let's skip. Okay, this is now the work of Wanguchi Mutu. And we've had this incredible film, Amazing Grace, and this very, very beautiful drawing, collage on linoleum with very sort of all sorts of different elements mixed into it. Like she says, in classical African art, the female body, in some instances, is the museum itself. The person, the woman, is where art is placed. Women express wealth, status, family, and tribe through their bearing and ornamentation. Her work again deals with gender, race, art history, and personal identity. She combines a variety of source materials and juxtaposes to basically to show us and to explore consumerism and excesses in society today. Her practice is often discussed as providing an alternate course of history for people of African descent. Western consumerism and its influence that America has had on countries and African cultures especially. So it really does show, I'm sorry, I didn't click onto the work. Click on. A lot of her work in the drawings is quite repulsive. Her mother was a doctor, so she used books from different parts of the female body or male body, and those are cut up and included into the drawings, into her collages. And for her, it is Mutu's use of such intentionally repulsive or otherworldly imagery may help women to step away from perfection and embrace their own imperfections, and becoming more accepting of others' flaws as well. Use image yeah, these are using images from her mother's medical books. So she really does talk about the idea of, we have this idea of, especially of how we portray women and how we in society we want to have this perfection, but we forget of looking at ourselves. In the videos, there's always the body or posed figure, and this, she says, uses, to focus your eye and to unlock dialogue about perception in both personal and political realms. Identity pivots around a kind of social contact that can be only broken through personal and political reinvention and a rewriting of the code that has been used to represent us. So all these artists, you see, there's quite a lot of re-looking, reworking, and really putting into context of today how society, how gender, how class, and how we all relate to each other. Penny Siopis, artist from South Africa. These are images of Wanguchi Mutu. Sorry, I'll just quickly go. She does also some very, very beautiful sculptures. And again, the sculptures, the one in the middle, which is wood, wood from trees, different materials to make up the female figure. And the small sculpture on the left, complete left, those are the sculptures she's done, cast in bronze, where she says the woman's body is the museum itself. And those are placed in the niches of the Metropolitan right now in New York. Penny Siopis, artist from South Africa, who's been an activist all her life. She has taught for over 35 years in South Africa and taught most of the young contemporary artists. Herself, she does mostly painting and film and a few installation works. This is one of her it's a very sad story, because this painting was done when her husband, Colin, who was an art critic and art historian, very, very well known in South Africa, died suddenly 3 years ago at Christmas. And so for 2 years, she just looked at this painting, and she's written a lot about grief and looking at it, the poetics of vulnerability, and extends her use and how chance is played. And so for 2 years, she basically cut newspaper articles and clippings and text from there and figures. And then she's used them to collage the whole bottom of the painting. And that's how she came through the grief. And the above is sort of this energy field, because her past 10 years, she's been working with glue and ink. Because for her, there's this whole idea of painting, there's the materiality, and then the surfaces, and how chance-driven process comes into play. Because she's a painter, she says, I know how to paint this, I've been doing all these paintings, she's done all the teaching, but now she's coming with this chance-driven process where the glue is opaque, is white, and she uses ink, because ink works differently than paint. And so with water, with the glue, the ink is hidden, and then as the glue dries, you start seeing different forms. And so there's always this mix of abstraction and figuration. And then she goes in with the paint and makes the figure a bit stronger, and then the glue takes over and you put more water, and there's all these processes, the air, depending when it's done, so it again changes and makes it more individual and makes it more expressive. For the show here, this was incredible, because Penny is one of the artists who's done new work specifically for the show. She had come to Mauritius, and we had worked on the lower left image is an image that she's done at the foundation, where she did the sculptures with seaweed. So we walked on the beach for the week before the show opened, and she collected seaweed. And again, this is the whole thing with chance, because by hanging the seaweed, the work, you have also the smell, you have the work changes. It started sagging, it started changing color, little pieces would drop. So there's this whole idea of the work evolving and shifting. And so when we asked her to be part of the show, she said, I've been to Mauritius, I know some of the things and really like to talk about the ocean. And so she did the film. A film is, she uses 8mm film that she's been collecting all her life from different countries, and she'd also found some in Mauritius. And those are then clipped together, images, and then she writes the text on it. So again, there's that sort of, the idea is there, and then she goes and finds images, and then from the images she gets ideas, from the images she gets another text, and so that's how it is. It's not something that she's actually filming. She's reusing 8mm film and cutting, slicing it, and repasting it and making the new film. So it's all images that have been taken by other people or from her childhood and what she's been collecting. And for the paintings, which are called Warm Waters, it's an installation. It's reference with the story of Paul et Virginie by Bernardin de Saint-Pierre, which is written in the mid-1700s. A romantic fiction, it is nonetheless one that critically reread along with other old stories can speak to the political ecology of our day. So she reread the story, re-looked at it, and then made this beautiful series of drawings based for that. Okay, so quickly, my time has run off, so I'll quickly go through Harja's work. Harja, again, is incredible artist who was raised in Dhahran, gated community, headquarters in Saudi Arabia of Aramco, where she spent most of her life. And again, this has really influenced her work because she said what we were allowed to do, we were not allowed to take photos, we were not allowed to do videos. And so she invented new games. It's like looking at planes, looking at flight paths, looking at different things, at rocks, formations. And this was different games and how this now has come into her work. Again, it explores themes of power, privilege, security, and traumas of displacement. Shilpa, Harja, also with the separation of Pakistan and India. There's this idea of the displacement. So they also, Harja moving, being a Muslim from India, then moving to Saudi Arabia, and now she lives in Toronto. She basically approaches all her work from a position of being a woman of color, a woman complex ties and relationships to North America, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia. And for her, it's basically telling people that provide an emotional response to her work. She says, even though there's the poetry or lyricism and you don't understand it, but it's like allowing the objects to speak for themselves, histories to infuse one another. Viewers can steep in a mystery of interconnected clues, creating tension and uncertainty in order to leave space for viewers to come to the work from their own perspective and histories, allowing for possibility of imagining and reimagining. So these are a few more of the works. These are the works upstairs. And these are, again, with found objects, different maps, different little drawings. For her, drawing is her most important element of her work. Thank you. And I'll let Prasannan continue. I'm sorry I had to cut it a bit short, but the time is running out.
Thank you, Salim. So Salim gave us a wonderful introduction to each of the artists. What I want to do is talk about some of the larger themes that we wanted to explore in the show. And these three themes are, first, the diversity and pluralism of the Indian Ocean world. This is an incredibly, these places that border on the Indian Ocean have populations drawn from across the waters of the Indian Ocean, Africans, Indians, Southeast Asians, Arabs, and so on. The second is the theme of borders and boundaries, which become extremely important from the 1930s on. And the final theme which is a most pressing concern today, is climate change and the future of the Indian Ocean. Now, to understand the diversity and pluralism of the Indian Ocean, one really has to understand the geomorphology of the Indian Ocean. And this is, there's more on this upstairs in the first section of introduction. The Indian Ocean is the only ocean in the world where winds reverse direction during the year. So it's possible to sail in one part of the year from west to east. So you could go from Africa to the Indian subcontinent, then wait a few months for the winds to reverse, and you can easily sail then from east to west. So sailing on the Indian Ocean in the pre-modern period, you could sail across the Indian Ocean during, if you knew this at the right season, about 4 times faster than you could sail on the Mediterranean. So it was really kind of like a lake for people who understood these winds. And this meant that going back thousands of years, you've had a dense zone of movement of people, exchange, trade, and goods. So to give one example, there are Roman coin hoards found all over the Indian subcontinent, which shows that there was trade going back to the ancient period. And this diversity you can see all over the Indian Ocean today. These are 2 photographs from the exhibit upstairs, which show you, on the right is an image of Hanuman. This is by Shiraz Baiju. This is from Mauritius. An image of Hanuman, an important Hindu god. And on the left is a Christian burial ground. So it's this kind of cheek-by-jowl existence of diverse populations that characterizes the Indian Ocean world. Now, while we've had extraordinary diversity here, we also need to remember that some of this diversity was the product of coercion and violence. The Indian Ocean was home to a very large slave trade in enslaved individuals going back over 1,000 years. It's not as well known in the United States or even by historians as the Atlantic trade in enslaved persons, but this was a very significant dimension of the Indian Ocean world until the late 19th century. And this is captured in Wangechi Muthu's extraordinary video in the show up in the second floor gallery called Amazing Grace. In this video, Wangechi Muthu sings Amazing Grace in Kikuyu, a Kenyan language, and Amazing Grace was composed in the late 18th century by John Newton to celebrate his transition from being a slave trader in his early life to being an abolitionist. So he had found grace. So Amazing Grace is at heart a celebration of anti-slavery. And this reminds us of the Indian Ocean slave trade. This plural and diverse world begins to break apart starting in the 1930s. During the Great Depression of the 1930s, there was economic competition intensified. You had growing anti-imperial sentiment. I mean, this was a time when the British dominated the Indian Ocean world. They had a number of possessions scattered throughout the Indian Ocean world, including Mauritius, India, East Africa, South Africa. So there was anti-colonial sentiment. So movements for nationhood. And what these movements of nationhood with economic competition led to in the 1930s was enormous riots across the Indian Ocean world against people who were identified as outside the nation, foreigners, strangers, aliens, even though some of these people had lived in these Indians, for instance, had lived in places like East Africa for 10 generations. But now they were identified as outsiders and needed to be expelled. So this is a process that begins in the 1930s. And Shilpa Gupta from Mumbai, who Salim introduced to us, speaks to this really powerfully in a number of works that we have upstairs. And the artificiality, the human-madeness of borders is something that she drives home in a number of different ways and using different media. And Shilpa, as Salim mentioned, part of her approach to borders was shaped by the disaster of the partition of India in 1947. And nothing represents the arbitrariness of borders as much as partition. The border between India and Pakistan was drawn in 6 weeks by a man who sat in London, Cyril Radcliffe, studying maps, never visited the border area, and led to a disaster in which about 1 million people were killed in the aftermath of partition, and something like 10 to 20 million people migrated. So partition has left behind the legacy of the Kashmir dispute. So where does Kashmir belong? And the Rohingya crisis is really the last chapter in this process that began in the 1930s, the creation of borders. So that's the second big theme. Now, the other big development after 1945 in the Indian Ocean is the rise of the Persian Gulf region as the center of the world's oil. And Hajra Wahid, this is a work that is upstairs entitled Untitled, I guess it's MAP or MAP. And this is a rendering of an underwater survey of the biggest deep water oil field in the world. This is off the Saudi coast in the Persian Gulf. So the extraction of oil, the extraction of other things from the ground is a major preoccupation for Hajra Wahid. And in the words of the historian Gabriela Hecht, what we've done in the post-1945 period is literally turn the world inside out. All these things that had been inside the planet for millions of years now are outside. And one of the side effects of this is climate change. So this brings me to the third theme, which is climate change and the future of the Indian Ocean. But this theme of climate change is very much rooted in the history of the Indian Ocean, and in the present of the Indian Ocean. And here, Gail Kinnicky of Earth and Environmental Sciences has been a really pivotal figure. So one of our collaborations is with Salim and the Institute for Contemporary Art Indian Ocean. A second collaboration, thanks to Gail, who had a number of brilliant suggestions for how to present some information on climate change and its impacts and so on, also connected us to two ocean scientists at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute who work on the Indian Ocean. So they helped us prepare materials along with Gail. The scientists are Caroline Umenhofer and Sujata Murthy, and they really have educated me and the others in the museum on climate change and the issues it raises in the Indian Ocean. I mean, the Indian Ocean is a major site for understanding our global warming because it has absorbed, the Indian Ocean has absorbed a disproportionate amount of heat that the world's oceans have taken up. So we have sea level rise in the Indian Ocean, which is much greater than in the tropical Atlantic or in the tropical Pacific. So inundation and so on. So that's one issue. The second issue is rainfall patterns are going to be affected, which will affect life all over the Indian Ocean. And finally, the biology of the Indian Ocean is being transformed as a consequence of heating. In the warmer water areas of the Indian Ocean, studies have shown that phytoplankton populations have fallen, and these are the base of the marine food system. If phytoplankton populations continue to plummet, then marine life will eventually die off. So this is a serious issue, and what it's really, to me, one of the extraordinary features of this show is that one of our artists, Penny Siopis from South Africa, she read kind of the précis of what we were trying to do, Salim and I. And she was so inspired by the theme of climate change, warming waters of the Indian Ocean, that she produced 2 works specifically for our show on the topic of rising waters, warming waters. The first is a set of, we've taken 30 paintings. It's from a larger set called Warm Waters. And literally, the colors on these pieces overflow their borders. It's a literal representation of what's happening, what will happen. So borders, nation states cannot restrain rising waters. So that gives us a political charge. The other piece, She Breathes Water, is a really powerful 5-minute video. I mean, I suggest that all of you try to catch it from the beginning to the end. It's 5 minutes long. And it's the first time I watched it, it was online on my computer, and I felt like someone had punched me in the stomach. It was so powerful. And then I showed it to my wife, Juliet Shore, of the sociology department, and she couldn't believe it either. So, She Breathes Water is a not miss. But I'd say that about every piece in the show. Now let me conclude with some words from Max Weber. I mean, I think it's really exciting that scientists have responded and are responding to the challenge of climate change. But I think in some ways it's even more important than artists are. Artists like Penny Siopis, and that they are grappling with our climate crisis. Now, in 1918, Max Weber, the great German sociologist, delivered a lecture at Munich University entitled Science as a Vocation. And in that lecture, he argued that science can clarify our world, but cannot give us meaning. So science helps us understand the world better, helps us see connections, and so forth. But the meaning of the world is something that we have to create. And in that lecture, Weber quoted Leo Tolstoy, the incomparable, in my opinion, Russian novelist. And Tolstoy wrote, "Science is meaningless because it gives no answer to our question, the only question important for us. What shall we do and how shall we live?" Penny Siopis, in her video She Breathes Water, asks, "Can you imagine the world without you?" That is the question we humans face today. And that is the question that artists can help us answer. Thank you.